Claire, table 7 needs another bottle of champagne. And smile more, barked Sarah, the manager, as she rushed past, balancing a tray. Claire tightened her apron over her belly and nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She grabbed the chilled $500 champagne from the bar and headed to table 7, where laughter rang out above the hum of the restaurant. She wasn't prepared for what she saw when she reached the table. Daniel. Her breath caught. He sat there, dressed in a sharp navy suit, his signature cocky grin plastered on his face. His arm rested casually over the back of the chair, leaning toward a woman Claire didn't recognize. The woman was stunning, wearing a red gown that clung to her figure like it had been painted on. Diamonds sparkled on her ears as she tilted her head back and laughed at something Daniel said. Claire froze, gripping the bottle tighter. 7 months pregnant and on her feet for 12 hours a day, she couldn't remember the last time she had laughed like that, or the last time Daniel had even looked her way. "Excuse me, miss." The woman's voice was smooth, cutting through Claire's thoughts. She realized she was standing motionless. "Right. Sorry," Claire mumbled, stepping forward. She set the champagne on the table and reached for the cork, her hands trembling. Daniel glanced up then, his eyes meeting hers. For a split second, his grin faltered. He blinked, recognition flickering in his gaze, but he quickly masked it with indifference. "Claire," he said flatly, leaning back in his chair. He didn't even try to hide the surprise in his voice. She forced a polite smile, ignoring the heat rising to her face. "Daniel," she replied, keeping her tone neutral. "Oh, you know her?" the woman asked, looking between them. "She's just someone I used to know," Daniel said, brushing it off with a wave of his hand. "Just someone I used to know." The words stung. She finished pouring the champagne into the woman's glass, willing herself not to say something she'd regret. "Thanks," the woman said with a smile. Claire caught her name from the conversation. Sophie. As Claire turned to leave, Sophie leaned closer to Daniel, lowering her voice. "She looks pregnant. Did you two—" "Don't," Daniel snapped, cutting her off. Claire didn't hear the rest of the exchange. She walked back to the kitchen, her knuckles white as she gripped the tray. Once inside, she leaned against the counter, taking deep breaths to steady herself. The kitchen staff bustled around her, oblivious to her turmoil. She thought about the months she had spent waiting for Daniel to come back, to call, to at least check in. She'd heard nothing, not a word. And now he was here, living it up with some glamorous woman like their life together had never happened. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out to see a text from her mom. "How's work? Don't overdo it. Remember to take care of yourself, for both of you." She stared at the message, blinking back tears. It wasn't fair. She was the one left to carry the weight, literally, while Daniel whined and dined like nothing had changed. "Claire, table 4 is waiting," Sarah called from the front. With a deep breath, Claire slipped the phone back into her pocket and pushed off the counter. She couldn't afford to lose it here. Not now. Not with the baby coming soon. As she made her way back to the floor, she glanced toward table 7 again. Sophie was whispering something to Daniel, her expression tight, but he waved her off with a dismissive laugh. Claire's hands clenched into fists at her sides. If he wanted to pretend she didn't exist, fine. But she wasn't going to let him have the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. She was stronger than that. And if Daniel thought he could just walk away from her and their child without consequences, he was dead wrong. Claire busied herself with the next few tables, forcing her focus onto the customers in front of her. Every time she passed table 7, she felt Daniel's presence like a weight pressing on her chest. She didn't look directly at him, but she could feel his eyes on her even when she wasn't facing him. "Excuse me, miss." Sophie's voice caught her off guard. Claire turned to see the woman standing near the bar, her clutch in hand, her face tense. Claire hesitated. "Yes. Is there something I can help you with?" Sophie looked around, as if making sure Daniel wasn't in earshot, then stepped closer. "I'm sorry to bother you, but you're Claire, right?" Her heart skipped a beat. Sophie knew her name. Claire nodded slowly, unsure of what was coming next. "I couldn't help but notice earlier. You're pregnant, right?" Sophie asked carefully, her voice lowering. "Yes," Claire said, her tone firmer than she intended. She wasn't about to let this woman pity her. Sophie hesitated, then bit her lip. "Is it Daniel's?" Claire's stomach twisted, but she kept her composure. "I don't think that's any of your business." Sophie blinked, looking momentarily taken aback by Claire's directness. "You're right, it's not," she said softly. He never mentioned anything." Claire raised an eyebrow, her patience wearing thin. "I'm not surprised. Daniel isn't exactly great at dealing with responsibility." Sophie's eyes flickered with something Claire couldn't quite place, pity maybe, or guilt. She glanced back toward the table where Daniel sat scrolling through his phone, oblivious to their conversation. "Look, I don't want to get involved," Sophie said, lowering her voice even more, "but you deserve better than this." Claire blinked, caught off guard by the unexpected kindness in her tone. "Thanks," she said after a moment, unsure what else to say. Sophie hesitated again, then placed a crisp $100 bill on the bar. "For you," she said, nodding toward the money. "Take care of yourself and your baby." Before Claire could respond, Sophie turned and walked back to the table, her head held high. Claire stared after her, the $100 bill burning a hole in her peripheral vision. She didn't want Sophie's money. She didn't want anyone's pity. But something about Sophie's words lingered, sticking to her like burrs. "You deserve better than this." For the rest of the night, Claire avoided table 7 as much as possible, letting another server take over their orders. Daniel didn't call her over, and Sophie didn't look her way again. By the time they left, she was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, and the tension in her chest had settled into a dull ache. As she clocked out and grabbed her coat, Sarah stopped her at the door. "You good?" she asked, her voice uncharacteristically soft. Claire nodded. "Yeah, just a long shift." Sarah gave her a skeptical look, but didn't press. "Get some rest. You've got the lunch shift tomorrow." Claire forced a smile and stepped outside into the crisp night air. The city lights sparkled against the dark sky, and the faint hum of traffic filled the silence. She walked slowly toward the subway station, her mind racing. You deserve better than this. She thought about Daniel, sitting there with his $500 champagne and his polished smile, pretending she didn't exist, pretending the baby didn't exist. The anger bubbled up again, hot and sharp, but this time it wasn't accompanied by helplessness. It was something else, something stronger. When she got home, she set her bag down and pulled out her phone. For weeks, she had been ignoring a bookmarked link on her browser, a website offering affordable online courses. She opened it now, her finger hovering over the sign-up button. You deserve better than this. With a deep breath, she clicked the link. Claire sat at the small kitchen table in her cramped studio apartment, staring at the laptop screen. The course portal loaded slowly, her ancient Wi-Fi straining under the pressure, but eventually the bright homepage appeared. "Beginner's Guide to Graphic Design," it read in bold, inviting letters. She sighed and rubbed her temples. It had taken hours of debating with herself before she had finally signed up. She had used part of Sophie's $100 tip to cover the first installment of the course fee, a decision she hated making. But now that it was done, there was no turning back. Claire glanced at her phone, sitting beside the laptop. The notification light blinked. She opened it to find a text from her mom. "How was work? Everything okay?" Claire hesitated, typing out a quick response. "Fine, just tired. Talk tomorrow." She set the phone aside and turned her attention back to the laptop. The first lesson was simple enough, an introduction to basic design principles. But even the small effort of clicking through the slides felt monumental. As the baby kicked gently, she placed a hand on her belly and whispered, "We're going to figure this out, okay? One way or another." She barely got through half the lesson before her head started to droop. The exhaustion from her shift was too much. Closing the laptop, she made her way to the bed, sinking into the thin mattress with a groan. Tomorrow was another long day at the restaurant. Still, as sleep claimed her, there was a flicker of hope. She had taken the first step. The next day, Claire arrived at work early, tying her apron tightly over her expanding stomach. The morning rush was just beginning, and the restaurant buzzed with activity. She had barely stepped onto the floor when Mr. Bernard waved her over from his usual table. "Good morning, Claire," the older man said cheerfully, his deep voice cutting through the din. Mr. Bernard was a retired architect who came in for breakfast almost every day. He had a kind smile and an air of wisdom that reminded Claire of her late grandfather. "Good morning, Mr. Bernard," she replied, setting his coffee down with a smile. "The usual today?" "Yes, but only if you promise to sit down for a second and tell me how you're holding up," he said, his tone gentle but firm. Claire hesitated. "You know I can't do that during a shift." "Nonsense," he said, waving her protests away. "You look like you're running on fumes. Sit." Reluctantly, she perched on the edge of the chair across from him. "I'm fine, really. Just busy." "Busy keeping the world on your shoulders," he said with a knowing look. "How's that young man of yours? What's his name? Daniel?" Her stomach turned at the mention of his name. She managed to shrug. "Haven't seen much of him lately." Mr. Bernard frowned. "That's so? A shame. He should be here, supporting you." But you've got that look about you, Claire, the look of someone who doesn't give up easily. Claire bit her lip, unsure how to respond. You're smart, you know, he continued. I see the way you handle yourself around here. Quick, resourceful. Have you ever thought about doing something else? Something that uses that sharp mind of yours? His words caught her off guard. Something else? Like what? He smiled. Oh, I don't know. You tell me. What's something you've always wanted to do? She hesitated, glancing down at the notepad in her hand. She thought of the graphic design course, the half-finished lesson waiting for her at home. It's hard to think about things like that when you're trying to make rent, she said finally. That's fair, Mr. Bernard said, his smile fading slightly. But don't let the grind steal your dreams, Claire. You owe it to yourself, and that baby, to fight for something better. Claire nodded, his words echoing Sophie's from the night before. Thanks, Mr. Bernard, I'll think about it. You'd better, he said, winking. Now go fetch me my omelette, before Sarah thinks I'm keeping you hostage. Claire chuckled and rose from the table, her spirits slightly lifted. She carried his words with her through the rest of the day, replaying them in her mind during every break and quiet moment. That night, Claire sat back at her laptop, her feet aching and her back sore. The first lesson was still open on the screen, waiting for her to finish. She pushed through, jotting down notes as she watched the instructor explain color theory and typography basics. It wasn't easy. Her mind wandered often, and her body begged for sleep. But by the end of the lesson, she felt a small sense of accomplishment. She had completed something. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As she closed the laptop, she thought again about Daniel. He had once told her she was too practical, too small-minded to ever go after big dreams. You're too scared to take risks, he'd said, during one of their arguments. The memory stung, but tonight, she felt a flicker of defiance. Maybe Daniel was wrong about her. Maybe she could do more, be more. Not for him, but for herself and for the baby. With that thought, Claire climbed into bed, feeling just a little lighter. There was a long road ahead, but for the first time in a while, it didn't feel impossible. The weekend rush hit like a freight train, and Claire was in survival mode. Orders were flying in, customers were restless, and Sarah was barking commands from every corner of the restaurant. Claire moved as quickly as her swollen feet and growing belly would allow, her apron stuffed with pens, order slips, and a stray receipt she hadn't had time to toss. By mid-afternoon, she'd just dropped off a tray of drinks when she spotted Sophie and Daniel walking into the restaurant. Again, her stomach twisted as Sophie scanned the room. Claire ducked her head, hoping to avoid eye contact, but it was too late. Sophie's gaze landed on her, and the woman gave a slight nod of recognition. Daniel, however, was busy talking on his phone, gesturing as though whatever deal he was discussing was the most important thing in the world. They were seated at a booth near the back, and Claire braced herself as she approached their table. Sophie looked up with a polite, almost apologetic smile, but Daniel didn't even glance her way, too absorbed in his phone call. "What can I get you both?" Claire asked, keeping her voice steady. "2 sparkling waters to start," Sophie said, her tone neutral, "and maybe a few minutes to look at the menu." Claire nodded and stepped away, grateful for the temporary reprieve. As she filled their glasses at the bar, she overheard snippets of Daniel's booming voice from across the room. "Look, if they want to close the deal, they need to up their offer. I don't have time for lowballing. Tell them I've got other clients waiting." The words grated on Claire's nerves. That same tone of arrogance, that same dismissive attitude, it was the reason she had been left alone to fend for herself while he schmoozed his way through high-end deals. She gritted her teeth and finished pouring the drinks, walking back to their table with her head held high. As she set the glasses down, Sophie spoke up. "Claire, right?" Claire paused, surprised. "Yes." Sophie hesitated for a moment, then said, "You've worked here for a while, haven't you?" "A few years," Claire replied cautiously. Sophie nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It's a nice place. Busy, though." "It keeps me on my toes," Claire said, forcing a small smile. Daniel finally looked up, frowning. "Sophie, can we not interrogate the staff? She's got work to do." Sophie shot him a sharp look. "I was just making conversation, Daniel. Relax." Claire took that as her cue to leave, retreating to the kitchen where she could breathe. She leaned against the counter, her pulse racing. She wasn't sure what Sophie was trying to accomplish, but it was clear the woman saw more than Daniel gave her credit for. Later that evening, after Sophie and Daniel had left, Claire was cleaning up when Sarah approached her with an envelope. "Someone left this for you," she said, handing it over. Claire frowned, opening the envelope to find a handwritten note and another $100 bill. The note was brief. "If you ever need help, don't hesitate to reach out. Sophie." Claire stared at the note, unsure whether to feel grateful or insulted. Did Sophie think she was some kind of charity case? She stuffed the money and the note into her pocket and tried to push it out of her mind, but it lingered. The following morning, Claire woke up to a string of emails from her graphic design course. The next lesson was available, and with it, a small assignment: create a simple logo using basic design principles. Claire sat at the kitchen table with her laptop, her sketchpad, and the cheap set of markers she had picked up from the dollar store. She worked slowly, her hands unsteady at first. The lesson had explained the importance of balance and contrast, and she tried to keep those in mind as she sketched out rough ideas. Hours passed, the sun creeping higher in the sky, but she didn't stop until she had something she was proud of, a simple, clean logo that felt like hers. She submitted it with a small sense of accomplishment, a quiet victory in the midst of chaos. But as she sat back, her thoughts drifted to Sophie and the note she'd left. Why had she gone out of her way to reach out? And what did it mean for Claire's future? Meanwhile, across town, Sophie sat in her office, staring at a folder on her desk. Inside were documents Daniel had sent her as part of their ongoing business deal: contracts, expense reports, and financial projections. But something wasn't adding up. She'd noticed discrepancies in the numbers, small at first, but increasingly glaring the more she dug. Her instincts told her to leave it alone, to let Daniel handle his own mess, but something about his dismissive attitude toward Claire and toward Sophie herself kept gnawing at her. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. Sophie picked up her phone and hesitated, her thumb hovering over the call button. She didn't know Claire well, but she couldn't ignore the nagging voice in her head telling her to do something. Finally, she dialed. "Hi, this is Sophie. I think we need to talk." Claire was in the middle of folding napkins for the lunch rush when her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and froze. It was an unknown number. For a moment, she debated letting it go to voicemail, but something told her to answer. "Hello?" she said cautiously. "Hi, Claire, it's Sophie." Claire's stomach dropped. She hadn't expected to hear from Sophie outside the restaurant. Hi, she replied, confused. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time," Sophie said. Her voice was softer than usual, less poised. I thought you should know something." Claire leaned against the counter, already bracing herself. "What is it?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I've been working with Daniel on a business deal," Sophie began carefully. "He sent over some documents for me to review and, well, something doesn't add up. I looked into it, and I'm almost certain he's been mismanaging funds, possibly worse." Claire didn't respond right away. Her grip on the phone tightened as Sophie continued. "I know this probably isn't your concern," Sophie added quickly, "but I thought you might want to know what kind of person you're dealing with. If he's willing to lie to his business partners, I can't imagine he's been honest with you either." Claire let out a bitter laugh. "You don't have to imagine. I already know." Sophie's voice softened. "I'm sorry, Claire, I know this must be hard to hear." Claire closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. "Why are you telling me this? What do you want me to do with this information?" "I don't want anything from you," Sophie said. I don't know. I feel like you deserve to know the truth, and maybe, if you decide to confront him, this could give you some leverage." Leverage. The word hung in the air between them. Claire didn't know if she wanted to confront Daniel again, let alone get involved in whatever mess he had created. But at the same time, the thought of holding him accountable, of forcing him to face the consequences of his actions, was tempting. "Thanks for telling me," Claire said finally. "I'll think about it." "Of course," Sophie replied. "And Claire, if you ever need help, you have my number now." Before Claire could respond, Sophie hung up, leaving her standing in the middle of the restaurant, her mind racing. That night, Claire sat at her kitchen table, staring at her laptop. She had spent the evening scouring her email for anything Daniel had sent her in the past: old receipts, shared files, anything that might corroborate what Sophie had told her. She felt like she was unraveling a thread, each new discovery leading her deeper into the tangled mess of his lies. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Sophie. "I forwarded you the documents I found. Check your email." Claire hesitated before opening her inbox. Sure enough, there were several files waiting for her. She clicked through them, her heart sinking with every new detail. The discrepancies Sophie had mentioned were glaring. Large sums of money had been moved around with no explanation, and there were fake invoices that made no sense. It was worse than Claire had imagined. Daniel hadn't just been careless, he had been deliberate, calculating. Her first instinct was to call him, to demand answers, but she stopped herself. She knew how that conversation would go. He would dismiss her, twist the narrative, make her doubt herself. No, if she was going to confront him, she needed to be prepared. The next day, Claire waited until the restaurant was quieter before pulling Sarah aside. "Hey, can I ask you something?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "What's up?" If someone hypothetically wanted to report financial misconduct, who would they go to? Sarah frowned, clearly taken aback by the question. "Depends on the situation. Are we talking about a company? A person? A company," Claire said quickly. "Like if someone had proof of embezzlement or fraud." "Well, if it's a big company, they probably have an internal compliance department," Sarah said. "If not, there's always law enforcement." "Why are you asking?" "No reason," Claire said, forcing a smile. "Just curious." Sarah didn't look convinced, but she didn't press further. Claire spent the rest of her shift deep in thought, weighing her options. Reporting Daniel would be a huge step, one that could have serious repercussions. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized she couldn't let him keep getting away with everything. He had lied to her, abandoned her, and now he was screwing over people like Sophie who had trusted him. By the end of her shift, Claire had made up her mind. She would report him, not just for Sophie, but for herself and for her child. That night, Claire drafted an anonymous email to Daniel's employer, attaching all the evidence Sophie had sent her. She didn't sign her name, didn't leave any trace of herself in the message. She hit send and closed her laptop, her hands trembling. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she had taken control. The fallout came faster than Claire had anticipated. It was just 2 days after she sent the anonymous email when whispers of Daniel's downfall started to trickle in. Sitting on a break in the restaurant's cramped employee lounge, Claire scrolled through her phone, her thumb hovering over a headline that stopped her cold. "Real estate exec under investigation for fraud allegations." She clicked on the article, her pulse quickening. The story didn't name Daniel outright, but the details were clear enough. A prominent agent accused of embezzlement, falsifying invoices, and skimming profits from his clients. The piece mentioned an ongoing internal review and hinted at law enforcement getting involved. Claire leaned back in the chair, her mind racing. It was happening. The dominoes were falling. And somewhere in the city, Daniel was finally facing the consequences of his arrogance and lies. That evening, just as the dinner rush started to pick up, Claire saw him. Daniel stormed into the restaurant, his face flushed with anger, his movements sharp and frantic. He ignored the hostess trying to seat him and made a beeline for Claire, his eyes blazing. "You!" he hissed, his voice low but venomous. Claire froze mid-step, balancing a tray of drinks. She glanced around nervously, hoping Sarah or another server would step in, but everyone else was too busy to notice. "What do you want, Daniel?" she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "What do I want?" he repeated, his tone rising. A few heads turned, and Claire shot him a warning glare, silently begging him not to cause a scene. Daniel lowered his voice but didn't back down. "I know it was you. Don't play dumb. You think you can ruin my life and just walk away?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Claire said calmly, setting the tray down on a nearby table. "And even if I did, maybe you should take a good look in the mirror before blaming someone else." His jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he might actually yell, but instead he leaned in closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "You think this changes anything? You think you've won?" Claire stood her ground, meeting his glare head-on. "This isn't about winning, Daniel. It's about you finally facing the consequences of your actions, something you've been dodging for years." Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Sarah appeared at Claire's side. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, her tone icy as she crossed her arms. Daniel took a step back, his face darkening. "It's no problem," he muttered, glaring at Claire one last time before storming out of the restaurant. Claire let out a shaky breath as Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Ex-boyfriend drama?" "You could say that," Claire muttered, grabbing her tray and returning to her shift, but her hands were trembling, and she spent the rest of the night replaying the encounter in her head. The next morning, Claire woke up to another text from Sophie. "I saw the news." "Are you okay?" Claire stared at the message for a long time before replying. "I'm fine. He came to the restaurant last night." Not thrilled, obviously. Sophie's response came quickly. "I'm not surprised, but for what it's worth, you did the right thing. I spoke to a few people at the firm. He's not coming back from this." Claire read the words again and again, letting them sink in. It was a strange feeling, knowing she had played a role in dismantling the life Daniel had worked so hard to build. Part of her felt vindicated, even relieved, but another part of her, smaller, quieter, felt something close to sadness. Not for Daniel, but for the person she had once believed he was. That afternoon she sat at her kitchen table, baby Samuel kicking gently against her ribs as she worked through her latest design assignment. She was starting to feel more confident with each project, her skills improving little by little. It was a small thing, but it gave her a sense of purpose, a reminder that she was moving forward, even when the past tried to pull her back. As she submitted her assignment, her phone buzzed with another message from Sophie. "Let me know if you ever need anything. You've got a friend in me." Claire smiled faintly, typing out a quick response. "Thanks, Sophie. I appreciate it." And for the first time in a long time, she meant it. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for now she was standing on her own 2 feet, and that was enough. The following week, Claire felt the weight of Daniel's wrath lingering like a storm cloud, though he hadn't shown his face again at the restaurant. She kept her head down and focused on her shifts, ignoring the whispers of her co-workers and the uneasy feeling in her stomach. The confrontation with Daniel had left her shaken, but it had also solidified her resolve. For the first time in years, she felt like she had control over her life. But Daniel wasn't the type to go quietly. It was a busy Friday evening when the phone call came. Claire had just stepped into the back room for a quick break when her phone buzzed on the counter. She didn't recognize the number, but something told her to answer. "Hello," she said cautiously. "Claire." His voice was sharp, clipped. It was Daniel. Her heart sank, but she kept her voice steady. "What do you want, Daniel?" "I want to talk, face to face." She let out a humorless laugh. "What could we possibly have to talk about? You made it pretty clear how you feel." "Don't play games with me," he snapped. "You think you're clever, don't you, sending that anonymous email, ruining everything I've worked for? Do you even realize what you've done?" Claire leaned against the counter, tightening her grip on the phone. "What I've done? Daniel, you did this to yourself. You lied, cheated, and stole your way to the top. All I did was make sure the truth came out." "You don't know what you're talking about," he growled. "You've always been naive, Claire. Always so self-righteous, like you're better than me. Well, newsflash, you're not. You're just a broke, pregnant waitress who—" "Enough," Claire cut him off, her voice firm. "You don't get to talk to me like that anymore, not after everything you've done. You can blame me all you want, but we both know the truth. You're the one who walked away. You're the one who couldn't handle responsibility. So don't call me again, Daniel. We're done." She hung up before he could respond, her hands shaking as she set the phone down. Her pulse raced, but beneath the fear there was something else, something like pride. For the first time she had stood up to him, and it felt like breaking free of a chain she hadn't even realized she was still wearing. The next day, Claire woke up to a voicemail from Daniel. She hesitated before playing it, expecting more anger, but his tone surprised her. He sounded defeated. "Claire, listen. I know I've messed up. I know I haven't been there for you, for the baby. Look, I don't expect you to forgive me, but I just need to see you, please, just one conversation. That's all I'm asking." She stared at the phone, her stomach twisting. Part of her wanted to ignore him, to cut him off completely and move on with her life. But another part of her, the part that remembered the man she used to love, felt a flicker of doubt. What if he was sincere? What if he had finally realized the weight of his mistakes? Claire spent the day agonizing over the decision. By the time her shift ended, she had made up her mind. She would meet him once. Not for him, but for herself. She needed closure, needed to say the things she had never been able to say. They met at a small park near the restaurant, the air crisp and cool as the sun dipped below the horizon. Claire arrived first, sitting on a bench and rubbing her belly absent-mindedly as she waited. When Daniel finally showed up, he looked different, haggard, his suit rumpled, his confidence replaced by something closer to desperation. "Claire," he said, stopping a few feet away. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "What do you want, Daniel?" she asked finally, her voice calm but distant. He sat down on the bench, keeping a careful distance between them. "I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. For leaving you. For the way I treated you. For—" "Stop," she interrupted. "I don't need your apology. What I needed was your support. I needed you to be there for me when I told you I was pregnant, and you weren't. You chose your career, your lifestyle, over me and our child. So don't come here now, acting like you've suddenly grown a conscience. Daniel winced, running a hand through his hair. I know I screwed up, Claire, but I want to make it right. I want to be part of the baby's life. Claire laughed bitterly. You think you can just waltz back in and play dad when it's convenient for you? That's not how this works. I'm serious, he insisted. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll pay child support. I don't want your money, Daniel, she said firmly. What I want is stability, consistency, and love for my child, and I don't think you can give us that. Not now, and maybe not ever. Daniel looked away, his jaw tightening. So that's it? You're just cutting me out completely. I'm doing what's best for my child, Claire said, standing up. And what's best for me? You had your chance, Daniel. You made your choices. Now, I'm making mine. She turned and walked away, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't look back, and for the first time she didn't feel the weight of regret or doubt. She felt free. That night as she lay in bed, Claire placed a hand on her belly and whispered softly, It's just you and me, kid. But we're going to be okay. I promise. And for the first time in months, she believed it. Claire was nearing the end of another exhausting double shift when it happened. She was carrying a tray of dirty dishes back to the kitchen when a sharp, twisting pain shot through her abdomen. She froze mid-step, nearly dropping the tray, and gripped the counter for support. Claire, you okay? One of the other servers asked, noticing her pale face. I'm fine, Claire lied, forcing a weak smile. Just tired. But deep down, she knew this wasn't just exhaustion. The pain came again, stronger this time, and she gasped, doubling over slightly. The baby wasn't due for another few weeks, but something told her this was it. By the time Sophie arrived at the hospital, Claire was already in a hospital gown, hooked up to monitors, her face tight with a mixture of pain and determination. She hadn't expected Sophie to be the one to show up, but when the pain started escalating, she had panicked and scrolled through her recent calls. Sophie's number had been there. You're going to be fine, Sophie said as she sat beside the bed, her voice steady and calm. Just breathe through it. Claire clutched Sophie's hand as another contraction hit, her knuckles white. I can't believe this is happening now, she muttered through gritted teeth. I wasn't ready. No one's ever really ready, Sophie said softly. But you're strong, Claire. You can do this. Hours later, after what felt like an eternity, Claire's son was born. The moment the nurse placed him in her arms, all the pain and fear melted away, replaced by an overwhelming sense of love and wonder. He was tiny, with a shock of dark hair and a pair of curious eyes that blinked up at her. Hi, Samuel, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. It's so good to finally meet you. Sophie stood quietly in the corner, giving Claire space but unable to hide the emotion on her face. She watched as Claire cradled the baby, her exhaustion forgotten, her joy unmistakable. For Sophie, it was a bittersweet moment, a reminder of her own past and the child she had given up so many years ago. Later that night, after the nurses had settled Claire and Samuel into a recovery room, Sophie pulled up a chair beside the bed. Thank you for coming, Claire said, her voice hoarse but sincere. I don't know what I would have done without you. Sophie shrugged, brushing off the gratitude. You didn't have to thank me. I'm just glad you and Samuel are okay. Claire studied Sophie for a moment, noticing the faraway look in her eyes. You've been through something like this, haven't you? Sophie hesitated, then nodded. A long time ago, she admitted. I had my son when I was 22. His father wasn't in the picture, and I wasn't in a place to take care of him. I gave him up for adoption. Claire's heart ached at the rawness in Sophie's voice. Do you ever regret it? Every day, Sophie said softly, but I also know it was the right choice for him. He deserved more than I could give at the time. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of Sophie's confession hanging between them. Finally, Claire reached out and squeezed Sophie's hand. You've helped me more than you know, Claire said, and I don't just mean today. I think I needed someone like you in my corner. Sophie smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. You've got a good heart, Claire, and now you've got a fresh start. Make the most of it. Over the next few days, Claire stayed in the hospital, recovering and bonding with Samuel. Sophie visited every day, bringing food, clothes, and even a small stuffed bear for the baby. Their bond grew stronger, forged by shared experiences and an unspoken understanding. When Claire was discharged, Sophie drove her home, helping her settle into the apartment. It was small and modest, but it was warm and safe, a place where Claire could start building a life for her and Samuel. As Sophie helped set up the bassinet, she turned to Claire. I've been thinking, she said. My family's business could use some fresh marketing materials. Nothing too fancy, just updated flyers and maybe a new logo. Would you be interested? Claire blinked in surprise. "You'd hire me? Why not?" Sophie said with a shrug. "You're talented, and you've got a great eye for design. Plus, it's freelance, so you can work from home and still take care of Samuel." Claire hesitated, her mind racing. It was an incredible opportunity, one that could give her the flexibility and income she desperately needed, but she also didn't want to feel like a charity case. "I don't know," she began. "Think of it as a partnership," Sophie said firmly. "You get experience, I get quality work, everybody wins." Claire smiled, her doubts fading. "Okay, let's do it." That night, as she rocked Samuel to sleep, Claire felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in months. Her life was far from perfect, but for the first time she had hope, real hope for the future. It was a new beginning, not just for her, but for her son. And as she watched him drift off in her arms, she silently vowed to give him everything she had. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The weeks after Samuel's birth blurred into a demanding yet strangely fulfilling routine. Days were spent balancing feedings, diaper changes, and stolen moments of sleep. In the rare quiet hours when Samuel napped, Claire turned her attention to Sophie's project. It was the first time in years she had felt truly excited about her work. The job wasn't glamorous, designing updated flyers and a sleek new logo for Sophie's family's boutique wine business, but it gave Claire a sense of purpose. She pored over online tutorials during Samuel's feedings, taking notes and experimenting with layouts late into the night. One afternoon, as Claire clicked through different logo iterations on her laptop, Sophie dropped by unannounced. She carried a bag of groceries in one hand and a coffee cup holder in the other. "Thought you could use a break," Sophie said, setting the bags down on the counter. "I didn't call because I figured you'd say no," Claire chuckled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You're not wrong. Thank you, though. You didn't have to do this." Sophie waved off the gratitude, pulling out a loaf of fresh bread and a carton of milk. "How's the project coming?" Claire turned the laptop to face her, revealing a few logo mock-ups. "It's slow going, but I think I'm getting somewhere." Sophie studied the designs, nodding thoughtfully. "These are great. Clean, modern. You've got talent, Claire. Real talent." Claire flushed at the compliment, feeling a mixture of pride and disbelief. "Thanks. I still have a lot to learn, though." "That's what makes you so good," Sophie said with a smile. "You're not afraid to admit you don't know everything. That's rare." Later that evening, after Sophie left, Claire received an email notification. She opened it to find feedback on one of her assignments from her graphic design course. The instructor had left a glowing review, praising her attention to detail and creative use of color. Claire smiled, a flicker of confidence sparking inside her. It was small, but it felt like proof that she was on the right path. Meanwhile, Daniel had been conspicuously silent since their last confrontation. Claire didn't know whether to feel relieved or uneasy. Part of her expected him to barge back into her life at any moment, demanding to see Samuel or stirring up more chaos. But as the weeks turned into months, he remained a ghost, his absence a stark contrast to his once overwhelming presence. One night, as Claire rocked Samuel to sleep, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from Daniel's former employer. The message was short, but impactful. "Thank you for bringing the financial discrepancies to our attention. Your actions allowed us to uncover further misconduct. We are pursuing legal action and have forwarded the matter to authorities." Claire stared at the screen, her breath catching. She hadn't expected to hear back from them, let alone receive confirmation that her actions had made a difference. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. She glanced down at Samuel, his tiny hand curled against her chest. "We're doing it, little guy," she whispered. "We're moving forward." A few weeks later, Sophie invited Claire to a launch event for her family's business. It was a small gathering, held in a cozy winery just outside the city. Sophie insisted that Claire attend, not as a server but as a guest. Claire hesitated at first, unsure how she'd fit in, but when she arrived, wearing a simple dress she had borrowed from her mom, she was greeted with warmth and admiration. Sophie introduced her to everyone as the designer behind the new logo, and the praise was genuine and overwhelming. "You've done amazing work," Sophie's father said, raising his glass to Claire. "We're lucky to have you." For the first time in a long time, Claire felt seen, not as a struggling single mom, but as someone with talent and potential. That night, as Claire lay in bed, she reflected on how far she had come. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was building something meaningful, not just for herself but for Samuel. The road ahead was still uncertain, but she no longer felt weighed down by fear or doubt. She smiled as Samuel stirred beside her, his soft breathing a reminder of the life she was creating for both of them. Whatever came next, she was ready. Resilience wasn't just a survival skill anymore, it was her foundation. The cool autumn breeze swept through Claire's apartment as she sat at her desk, bouncing Samuel lightly on her lap. She adjusted the strap of her carrier, securing him close to her chest as she squinted at her laptop screen. Her email inbox was full of new opportunities, freelance design requests, inquiries from small businesses Sophie had referred to her, and even a tentative offer for part-time remote work with a boutique design firm. The progress was exhilarating and overwhelming. For the first time, Claire felt like she was truly carving out a path for herself, but the weight of responsibility still loomed large. Every decision she made now wasn't just for her, it was for Samuel too. That afternoon, as she reviewed a new project proposal, her phone buzzed. It was Daniel. She stared at the screen, her stomach twisting. After weeks of silence, he was suddenly calling. She debated ignoring it, but finally sighed and answered. "What do you want, Daniel?" she said, her voice steady but firm. There was a long pause on the other end. "Claire," he said, his tone subdued. "I want to see my son." Her heart sank. She had been waiting for this moment, knowing it was inevitable, but she still wasn't ready. "Why now?" she asked, keeping her voice measured. "You've had months to step up. What's changed?" "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," he replied, "about taking responsibility. I know I've made mistakes, but I want to do better for Samuel. I want to be part of his life." Claire let out a slow breath, her mind racing. She thought about all the nights she had spent awake, rocking Samuel back to sleep, worrying about how she would make ends meet. Daniel hadn't been there for any of it, and now, when her life was finally gaining momentum, he wanted to reappear. "Daniel, I don't know if I can trust you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You left when I needed you most. You haven't done anything to prove that you're ready to be a father." "I'll prove it," he said quickly. "Whatever it takes. I'll pay child support, "This isn't about money," she interrupted, her frustration boiling over. "It's about consistency. It's about being there, day in and day out, no matter how hard it gets, and I don't think you're ready for that." "Claire, please," he said, his voice breaking. "I need a chance." She closed her eyes, her emotions swirling. "You'll get one," she said finally, "but on my terms. We'll start slow, visits supervised by me, and if I see even a hint of your old behavior, it's over." Daniel hesitated but eventually agreed. "Okay, I'll take what I can get." The first visit was awkward. Daniel arrived at Claire's apartment looking nervous and out of place. He brought a small stuffed elephant for Samuel, who was more interested in chewing on his own fingers than engaging with the toy. Claire kept a watchful eye on Daniel the entire time, her guard up, ready for any sign of his old arrogance or unreliability. But to her surprise, he seemed genuine. He held Samuel with surprising tenderness, his expression softening as the baby cooed and squirmed in his arms. For a moment, Claire saw a glimpse of the man she had once loved, the man she had hoped Daniel could be. When he left, she felt a mix of relief and uncertainty. She wasn't sure if he would stick around, but she had done her part. The rest was up to him. As the weeks went on, Claire focused on her work and her son, refusing to let Daniel's reappearance derail her progress. Sophie continued to be a source of support, offering advice and encouragement whenever Claire felt overwhelmed. "You're doing amazing," Sophie said one evening as they sat in Claire's living room, Samuel napping in his bassinet. "You've built this life from scratch, and no one can take that from you." Claire smiled, grateful for Sophie's friendship. "I couldn't have done it without you." "Sure you could have," Sophie replied with a grin. "It just would have been harder." Months later, Claire stood in her small apartment packing up boxes. Her freelance work had grown into a steady stream of income, and she had finally saved enough to move to a slightly bigger place, a modest two-bedroom apartment closer to the design firm that had offered her part-time work. It wasn't fancy, but it was a step forward. As she placed Samuel's toys into a box, she thought about how far she had come. She had faced betrayal, heartbreak, and overwhelming odds, but she had come out stronger. And now, as she looked at her son playing on the floor, she felt a deep sense of pride. This was the life she had built. It wasn't perfect and it wasn't easy, but it was hers. That night, as she rocked Samuel to sleep in their new home, Claire whispered softly, "We did it, kid. We're going to be okay." And for the first time, she didn't just believe it, she knew it. The crisp morning air filled Claire's new apartment, as sunlight streamed through the sheer curtains in the living room. Samuel was propped up in his playpen, babbling to himself and occasionally shaking a brightly colored rattle. Claire watched him from the kitchen, sipping her coffee and reviewing her calendar on her phone. The day was packed: client calls, project deadlines, and of course, the never-ending task of balancing it all with being a mom. It wasn't easy, but Claire had found her rhythm. The move had been a turning point, both literally and figuratively. Her new apartment wasn't just a physical upgrade, it was a symbol of everything she had worked for. The second bedroom, though small, was now Samuel's nursery. The tiny corner in the living room had become her home office, where she designed logos, layouts, and promotional materials for clients who valued her growing talent. Daniel's visits had become consistent. True to his word, he was making an effort, showing up on time, being present with Samuel, and even pitching in financially. Though Claire still kept her guard up, she could see that he was trying. They were far from friends, but she had established boundaries, and he respected them. During one visit, as Daniel sat on the floor stacking blocks with Samuel, he glanced at Claire. "You've built something amazing here," he said quietly. "I mean it. I don't think I could have done what you've done." Claire didn't respond immediately. She appreciated the sentiment, but her journey had taught her that words were easy, actions mattered more. "Thanks," she said simply, turning back to her work. The past was still too raw for forgiveness, but she was learning to coexist with him for Samuel's sake. One evening, Sophie invited Claire to dinner at her family's winery. It was a small, intimate gathering to celebrate a successful quarter, thanks in part to Claire's design work. As they clinked glasses and passed plates around the table, Sophie leaned over to Claire. "Have you thought about what's next?" she asked, her tone light but curious. Claire shrugged. "I'm still figuring it out. For now, I'm just focused on keeping things steady." Sophie smiled knowingly. "Well, when you're ready to take the next step, let me know. I might have a few ideas." It was the kind of comment Sophie often made, half serious, half teasing, but it planted a seed in Claire's mind. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future where her freelance work grew into something bigger, a business of her own, perhaps. The thought both excited and terrified her. Months turned into a year, and Claire continued to thrive. Samuel's first birthday was a modest celebration, a small gathering with Sophie, Mr. Bernard from the restaurant, and a few close friends. Claire baked a simple cake, and Samuel smashed his chubby hands into the frosting, laughing as everyone cheered. It was a bittersweet moment for Claire. She thought about how far they had come, about the struggles and sacrifices that had brought them to this point. She also thought about the future, about the challenges and joys still to come. As the guests left and the apartment grew quiet, Claire sat on the floor with Samuel, holding him close. "You're going to do amazing things, little guy," she whispered, "and I'm going to be right here cheering you on every step of the way." In the years that followed, Claire's life continued to evolve. She built a small but successful design agency, working from home and eventually hiring a team of freelancers to help manage the workload. Samuel grew into a bright, curious child who loved drawing beside his mom while she worked. Sophie remained a close friend and mentor, offering guidance and support whenever Claire needed it. Claire often thought about the journey that had brought her here, the pain, the betrayals, the moments of doubt, but she also thought about the resilience she had discovered within herself, the strength that had carried her through. It wasn't an easy road, but it was hers, and she walked it with her head held high. One quiet evening, as she watched Samuel sleep, Claire sat at her desk and opened her journal. She wrote a letter to her son recounting their journey, the lessons she had learned, and the hopes she had for his future. She ended it with a simple message. "No matter where life takes us, remember this. You are loved and you are capable of anything. The world is yours to shape. Always believe in yourself, because I will always believe in you." Claire closed the journal, her heart full. Life wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful in its imperfections, and for that she was grateful.